Hey there, short film fans. It's Nigel Morgan, host of the Cameo Launch Short Film Podcast. Thank you for joining us once again, and we are super happy to be able to speak to the fantastic, incredibly talented director, Leland Montgomery, the director of the short film Hotter Up Close. The watchlist review for that film is out on cameolaunch.com right now, so go ahead and check that out. That film closes out our month-long season of highlighting short films from the LGBTQIA plus community. We've enjoyed it immensely. We've come across some amazing stories, and we're really, really happy to be able to close it out with a conversation with the director of our final film. So, Leland, thank you so much for joining us. How have you been?
Good. I'm super happy to be here, and it's so cool that you had a whole month dedicated to LGBTQ content. I think that's really amazing. So we're happy to close it out.
Awesome. No, I mean, as I said, we've had a great time seeing some of the amazing stories being told, and um,
Yeah.
we love short film, and we love people that make great short film, and of course that includes you. This is a really, really enjoyable, funny, just heartfelt short film. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of the movie itself, but would you be able to start off by telling us a little bit about what made you gravitate towards film as a means of expression and telling your stories and your experiences?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that is always it has always been something I've been really interested in. Like I hate to be hacky because this is like such like a directory trope about like, oh, I made movies when I was little on like VHS. And I did, but it's funny because like I did that for a period and then totally forgot about it and then got really interested in like live performance. And then, I went to drama school and I moved to LA to be an actor. And I think throughout trying to be a performer, I would always have like too strong opinions about like costumes and sets and
Yeah.
I was always like, well, what about this? What about this? And essentially like the feedback I was getting was like, hey, just like do your lines. Like we don't need you to like come look at the
Right.
monitor. And so as I realized that I was sort of interested in like the bigger picture and I kind of like started to transition into that, like the stuff from childhood where I was like, oh yeah, I did make like dumb little movies on VHS. Like that started to like come back and I was like, okay, so this is like deeper than just like a whim.
Mm.
Um, I mean, I think part of it too was when I first moved to LA because I had gone to drama school in Southern California. Like a lot of the actors who I studied with were in Los Angeles. And like at that point, we were all in our early 20s. So like no one was really working. And
Okay.
it just seemed like a shame that all these people who I admired so much like didn't have opportunities. So I was like, I guess I'll do it. And then as we like started to like put together these little shorts, I really was like, oh, I think this is where suddenly it all kind of like clicked into place and made sense. Um, and then so I did like a bunch of little shorts and then I went to film school and that just kind of like really reinforced that like, oh, this is what you should be doing or like at least try to do with your life.
Yeah, no, I mean it seems to have set you up quite well. Some of the previous films that you've made, they've had a real craft and a real sheen to them. So there's clearly a lot of knowledge of film craft that you've been applying for quite some time already. So, at what point did film become kind of an option for you? Because it's obviously a difficult industry to get into, and it's certainly difficult to get the kind of resources that you'd need to make the kinds of films that you've made. So, when did that open up as an option?
Yeah, I would say sort of like, you know, about a year or two after I moved here, I think that when we were like putting together these like little 25-cent movies, just like grabbing like like we would shoot on one scene on a DSLR and another scene on like a Sony A3 and a third scene on like some other camera that someone had, and like, we would kind of put it together. And I think that
Mm,
that was really helpful because like even though technically those movies are like pretty rough and I look at them now and I'm like, oof, there is like a real, some of them have like a real um, really strong storytelling that I can also look back and appreciate and be like, "Oh, this like, the storytelling piece is the most important piece." And so,
Yeah.
like, I think that realizing that opens up a lot of doors because I think that, like, if I had gone to film school before I had done that, I think that I would have felt like the only way to do something was in, like, a glossy, fancy way, and, like, kinda,
Mm,
like, being in the trenches before going to film school, I think let me be like, "Oh, I can just do it." And then actually by the doing of it, weirdly, like, that opens up doors. Like, I mean,
right.
not to sound, like, super hippy dippy and, like, manifesty, but, like, it is amazing that, like, once the train leaves the station in terms of any movie, um, it does just like, necessity invites resources kind of that, like, as the thing is leaving, you kind of are like maybe it's just like the desperation of being like, "How are we gonna get this?" And, like, suddenly, like, all of your, like, social, fears go out the window, and you're really brazen about asking for things, and suddenly things just appear. That's a long way of saying that, like, the option presented itself by being really, like, down and dirty, and then once I was like, "Oh, you don't need anything, you just kind of need a point of view,"
Yeah.
that's when I was able to be like, "Okay, well, we're just gonna do it," and then by saying, "We're just gonna do it," everything kind of, like, I mean,
Mm,
and that makes marshaling resources feel like not the monumental task that it is, because it
yeah.
is,
Yeah.
but I think that, like, kind of, like, getting in the dirt, you start to be like, "Oh, I see how to do this more." Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, it does make sense that right at the very beginning when all you've got is like words on paper, or even before that, the task seems monumental. I mean, you're almost afraid to write certain things
Yeah.
because somewhere in your brain you're like, yeah, but how are you actually going to arrange that? Where are you going to
Yeah,
get that
yeah.
prop from? How are you going to pay for that? But once you're actually there, once scenes are being shot, or once people have said, yeah, I can definitely make that date, I'll be there, then you kind of there's a kind of momentum which other people who get involved look at it and say, okay, it's already moving, I can nudge it a little further
Yeah.
forward. And once you kind of reach critical mass with that, then yeah, then you're off to the races, as they say. um in that kind of scenario, then once you actually do get moving, what do you find are some of your biggest obstacles?
There I mean, there's personal obstacles, and then there's, like,
Mm,
obstacles, like, logistical obstacles. I think personal obstacles is that because, like, at the scale that we're doing it, I'm usually one of the producers. I mean, we had a really amazing producer on Hotter Up Close, which
mhm,
this woman named Carolyn Minetti, which was great, but, often I am also producing, and I think that I sometimes have a hard time with there being so many variables up in the air, feeling confident that things are actually going to happen.
yeah,
Because it's like, oh, this actor can only do it if we're shooting this scene on this day, which means that like we have to make sure that the location, which and so it's like all of these like step ladders of like I hope that the stars align. And so my my personal obstacle is just like chilling out and being like, it will or it won't, and then pivoting
yeah.
because I can kind of squeeze really hard and be like following up 17 times, and
Great.
everyone's like, relax, it'll happen. I think that the reassuring thing is that that doesn't go away at any level. Like there's a pretty well respected indie director, indie in the sense that he's won like Independent Spirit Awards, not indie in the sense that like he's like setting up crafty, but he went to my school and he came to talk to us about this movie that had come out like 3 or 4 years ago that had like a bunch of famous people in it, and I think won an Independent Spirit Award. And he's like very fancy, and all the people associated with him are very fancy and very
Mm.
cool, and um, and he was saying that they were making a movie, and I think the budget on theirs was like 1.5, and that they were at a location. They had a location that they really wanted, and then at the last minute they got bumped because like NCIS came in, and I was like,
Oh,
oh, so
wow.
like even if you're like a fancy, like cool young director with resources, like a TV show can come in and sweep in and like kick you out.
Yeah.
And, like, I was like, oh, so this is
Oh,
at
wow.
every scale. It's like it doesn't stop.
So with all of that kind of on your mind and on your back, what made you put all of those resources specifically into Hotter Up Close? What was your motivation for going all in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple of things. A is that I mean, the biggest thing is is actually like the pandemic because A, I turned 30 during the pandemic, and B, I like it's just been such a terrible 2 years, that I think that like we wanted to do something that was like really joyous and really fun and really uplifting. And even like the villains of the movie are like kind of silly and sort of warm and like come together in the end. There's like we just wanted something where it's like a community, it's a movie about community and a movie kind of about family and
Right.
like where like it's just really like fun and happy, and I think that that was something that we really wanted. And also, like turning 30 like as a gay man feels so terrifying because it feels like, all right, well, now now I'm done. And so like also to kind of like make that like address the insecurities that we have about it, because those insecurities are real and they're widely shared. And also b like make fun of it because it's at the same time it's like not real, like you're not done, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so I think that that kind of all like mixed together to be like, this is the thing we want to do.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, you talk about kind of reflecting some of your own identity and your own journey in there.
Yeah.
Um, what is it about the way film is now that pushes you to highlight those specific areas of your journey and your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Bros just came out and people are
Yes.
loving it, and Fire Island
Mm,
came out recently, which people really like too. And I think that like it's interesting because on the one hand, um, in the media, there's like a lot more representation than there was even when I was like younger.
mm,
Um, and there's more varied representation too, because like when I was like sort of like in my formative like tween years, like
mm,
it was either like there was like Will and Grace, where it's like, okay, well, you can kind of be like straight acting and mask and like handsome in a traditional way, or there were these sort of like hairstylist parts, and it's like, okay, or you can be that, and there's like no in between. And so on the one hand, I'm like, okay, great, there's all of this um really great representation. But then on
mm.
the other hand, if you like look to the like political leaders in this country, where you have like Clarence Thomas, who's like, maybe we should rethink not only gay marriage but whether like homosexuality should be legal in this country. And like you're like, oh,
He's a
so
great guy, isn't he?
yeah. um, so it's like, yes,
Mm,
the media has evolved, and I think that the
mm.
culture has evolved, but the political institutions haven't. So
Yeah, yeah.
this is still really important to like push things forward. And
Mm,
like for a long time, I think that I was like the way I looked at stories was sort of like I would write from my experience, which is as a gay man, which
mhm.
is different from a straight man, and I would be like, well, what's the nearest thing? And I'd be like, oh, a strong woman. So let's make this like gay character into a strong woman, and then that'll just be the story. And I think that like with the last 2 years and with what's happening, I've also thought like, hey, just personally, I think I really need to shift back to um, telling gay stories, because it's really important. I think that
Mm,
we thought for a minute, up until 2016, that like, we've arrived, like we can, or at least maybe
mm.
I did, that like it's safe, like we don't have to like advocate for this as much.
Mm,
And then to be like, oh no, you absolutely do. And I also want to
yeah.
acknowledge that even me saying that's like very naive and silly, given like, you know,
Mm,
how challenging things still were even for then for a lot of different people. But
yeah.
it's wrapped up in my own kind of like awakening of insecurity
Right.
as someone in in America, at least.
One of the things this film does very well, and something I think is very important in a broader sense, is to simply normalize it, is to
Yeah,
take those experiences which are specific to you as a gay man and put it into a story whose themes are universal,
yeah,
and focus on a story where the conflict isn't um, the difficulties you run into being gay. It's just about this person's life, and then you deal with the character conflict.
Yeah.
that comes along with that. Was it a conscious decision to tell stories in a way which just normalizes your experience and to help it gain that sort of mainstream traction?
Yeah, 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 totally, absolutely, and that was, like those were conversations we had, like, sort of from the get-go where, it's in the world of romantic comedies, and the worlds of romantic comedies are, like, nothing really that bad happens,
Yeah.
because Chris was like especially Chris, who is, Asian American, is like, I really don't get to be that ever, so, that was something too where we were like, "Okay, this is gonna be," we just wanna make uh a romantic comedy in the tradition of romantic comedies, you know?
Hey there, short film fans. Thanks for watching our interview. If you want to catch the entire thing, then head over to cameolaunch.com/podcast, where you can catch all of our filmmaker interviews in their entirety. You can also subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and many more. You can also keep up to date with all things Cameo Launch by heading to cameolaunch.com and signing up to our newsletter, or by following us on the socials at Cameo Launch on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. If you haven't already, then please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to smash that bell for alerts of new content. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.